So, to talk about this hazard classification process, which is what this is all about today, it's a three-step process. And it's a process undertaken by manufacturers and importers. So, essentially, well, there's a few people in here who would know about that angle, but essentially in your world, if you're just in the tier 2 reporting world, it's really going to be done already, okay? I mean, HazCom probably is on the other end of this spectrum, but if you're just on the reporting side of it, you would pretty much take the classifications that companies have come up with, and that's what you run with when you do your reporting. But if you're a manufacturer or an importer, you actually have to go through this classification process, and it's a three-step process. First, you have to identify a full range of available, relevant, published data regarding the hazards of a chemical. So if we were looking at health hazards, maybe epidemiological data is something we would look at. Or if we were looking at a physical hazard like flammability, there's other published data that we would look at. Then they take that data, and the next step is to review it, to ascertain the hazards associated with the chemical. So you review this published data, ascertain the hazards, and then employing the uniform criteria and decision logic found in what's called the Purple Book. They actually determine whether a chemical is hazardous and the degree to which it's hazardous. That's the big change in this whole process over previous hazard communication. So that's what the GH process is. So if you see the Purple Book, if you're interested in seeing that famous Purple Book, which is really the Bible for those who actually have to classify these things, you could download it. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages. And again, it's for people who are manufacturers and importers who have to go through the classification process as per GHS. Okay, now it's these three segments that are really going to interest you: hazard groups, hazard classes, and hazard categories. Okay, these are the key words when it comes to the new hazard classification process. So we were dealing with two hazard groups: physical hazards and health hazards. GHS also covers environmental hazards. So the global, the grand GHS product there actually covers the environment. That is not part of OSHA. Okay, so we're just going to talk about health and physical hazards. So those are the hazard groups. Under each one of those groups, there are what's called hazard classes. So under health hazards, you have a whole list of hazard classes. I'm going to show you that list. But an example of that would be acute toxicity. So hazard group is health hazards, hazard class, acutely toxic. In the physical hazard group, one of those classes is flammable liquids. Okay? And there's a bunch of others. I'm going to show you that list very quickly and briefly. We're not going to go into detail at all about it, but there is a list of classes under each hazard group. Then, under each of those hazard classes, there are hazard categories. And they are usually numerical or letter designation or both. And you'll see how that works. And again, it's the whole logic behind this is in the Purple Book. We're not going to talk about the Purple Book. If you have a personal interest in it, you can look up how that's all done. But the thing you have to know for your reporting on this is where to find that on an MSDS sheet, or an SDS sheet, excuse me, and where it is, and Carol will tell you what you have to do with those letter or number designations. And there are one or more hazard categories per class. We'll look at that. For instance, for flammable liquids, there are 4 categories. For acute toxicity, there are 4 categories, and we'll show you what they are and what those numbers mean. Okay. The lower the number, the higher the risk. So if you have a hazard category of 1, that's the highest risk. If you have a hazard category of 4, that's the lowest risk. For those of us in the response community, if you're familiar with NFPA 704 or the HMIS system, it's just the opposite. You go from 0 to 4 with the lower number being the lower risk. So it might be a little disorienting if you are a responder. Here are the hazard classes within the health hazard group. I'm not even going to read them off, but there they are. Just so you can have a look at that. Again, we're just kind of skimming over it, but those are all the hazard classes within the health hazard group. And I already talked about acute toxicity, and then a bunch of other skin corrosion, irritation, serious eye damage, et cetera, carcinogenicity. All right, I didn't say it right, but you know what I mean. And then you'll notice on the very bottom, and this is important, and Carol may have a lot more to say about this, if it doesn't fit neatly into any one of those, they have a category now that's called hazards not otherwise classified. Doesn't fit into the health or physical hazard class, but it kind of sits alone out there. So I don't know how many chemicals will happen to have that classification. You may never see it, or maybe it's more common than I suspect, but I can't tell you. But that is new. That's sort of a catch-22, not otherwise specified category that they have now. Here are the hazard classes within the physical hazard group. It's pretty predictable, right? I already mentioned flammable liquids. It's right down there, about 5 or 6 down. And again, what's the last one in red? Hazards not otherwise classified. So you've got that catch-22 there for them. Anyway, but I'm not going to dwell on any of those. I should probably mention, though, I said that this was a universal international system. It sort of is, but not quite, because some countries have decided to add things to the classification scheme, and some countries have decided not to. Some companies have deleted some. So, for instance, combustible dust, the US and Canada decided to throw that into the physical hazards, but in the EU and Asia, or China specifically, they do not have it. But they have some stuff, mainly on the environmental side, that we don't have. So just, it's not quite totally universal, but nearly.